Ben Johnson, Detroit Lions offense coordinator, for the second year in a row, has withdrawn his name from the head coaching search, depending on who you listen to. And this is now the problem we live in with this world of insiders trading on, information that's fed to them by agents or by teams or by players or whoever, and is regurgitated verbatim with whatever editorializing and spin is put on it. It's impossible to tell what actually happened. One guy is going to tell you that Ben Johnson withdrew his name. Another person is going to say, they weren't that interested in him to begin with. But what is your read on the situation? And then we'll get into some of the reports that are out there.
Obviously, it all depends on what really happened behind the scenes, right? Exactly what you talked about. But on the surface level, from our side of things, the first thing that comes to my head is, holy cow, what a culture Dan Campbell is building with the Lions. Because if it's just straight up Ben Johnson felt unfinished business in Detroit, that he wanted to stay in Detroit, or maybe even that he wasn't dying to be a head coach yet, right? I think that that's such a foreign concept to a lot of people. They're like, whoa, what are you talking about? Every coordinator would want to be a head coach immediately. Well, I don't know if that's the case with literally everyone. And it kind of feels like now 2 years in a row, Ben Johnson's had the opportunity to jump to a head coaching role, and he has said no. I mean, when you talk about the money that this dude has turned down over the last 2 cycles, when you look at last year, a lot of people would say, oh, okay, he didn't want to work for David Tepper. He kind of sniffed what was going on in Carolina. He didn't really want that. Tepper's one of the richest owners that there is. So for him to say no to Tepper, if they really wanted him, I mean, you're talking about turning down a lot of money, and probably would have done the same thing if he would have been seriously considered for Carolina. But new ownership group in Washington, they got a lot of capital to spend. They're trying to nail it. Obviously, with Seattle, you can't just replace Pete Carroll with anybody. You've got to replace him with somebody who is going to be successful, because the floor that Pete had was so high. So all of this to say, Ben Johnson has turned down really great opportunities over the last couple of years. But he has done so, I think, partially because of how great it is to be in Detroit right now. This is a team that, oh my God, when they lost to the 49ers, it felt like we were all, I mean, not 49ers fans, obviously, but like, it felt like if you were neutral at all in this game, you felt heartbroken. Like, you felt a little sad for the Lions, not just how they lost, but just that they lost in general. And the way that you look at what this team has done, what Dan Campbell has done, obviously when they were on Hard Knocks, like how they have captivated so many people, I don't think that's bullshit. I don't think that's just them putting on a front. I think it is a genuine culture that is, I would say, now solidified in Detroit under Dan Campbell. And I think it's sort of a combination of a handful of things with Ben Johnson, but part of that pie is, to me, absolutely the fact that Detroit and how that franchise was once looked at, that's different now. This is one of the premier franchises that you can work for in the league.
You and I both had similar reactions when I first got your take with it before we went on, and just my reaction at the time, which is, okay, last year, one time, it kind of makes some sense. Twice in a row is a little bit weird, I can understand you taking a look at Carolina last year, and even if he was willing to throw a ton of money at you saying, I just don't love the way this looks, and I'm not into the Carolina thing. I'm going to stay back for a year in Detroit. I backed myself to do even better this time around, and that worked out, right? And I'll have an even better opportunity next year. And that worked. Like, he bet on himself. The Lions were even better. His job was just as good, if not better. They almost went to the Super Bowl, and he comes into this cycle at least as hot a candidate as he was a year ago. And consequently, the job that he looked most likely to get was that Washington job, which I think was a better option this time around than Carolina was a year ago. You're looking at the number 2 overall pick rather than the 1. Okay. But they have a ton of cap space. They have a new owner who's been in the sports business before, has just dropped a ton of money on it. And at least from so far, looks like he A, knows what he's doing, and B, is not, going to want to meddle every 3 seconds at everything, right? No, sort of wants to do it the right way. That looks like a really good opportunity. You've also got a lot of playmakers, at various different levels. It's a reasonable roster. It's not in an absolute disastrous state. I think a good coach, if he gets a quarterback, i.e. the number 2 overall pick, could turn that into something pretty impressive quite quickly. So to sort of look at that and say, I'm not interested in either of those 2 years in a row, that's where it starts to look a little bit strange to me. And, you know, obviously Lions fans are just going to take it as face value. Well, he said he's got unfinished business. Well, Dan Campbell himself told the team that might have been our one shot. You know, we don't know if we're going to get back again ever. We'd like to think we'll be back next year and we'll do it again. And next year will be they might never get back. That might have been it. That might have been their one shot. That might have been their 84 Dolphins, where everything looked like it was on the way up and Marino never sniffed the Super Bowl again. If that was their one shot, like throwing away an opportunity to coach an NFL team as the main guy, it might not come around again. So as much as, yeah, it's plausible that he just loves it in Detroit and he feels unfinished business and he wants to get that ring and all those kinds of things, it still is very strange to sort of assume that door will always be there. Like, there are coaches that have been fantastic coordinators that cannot sniff a head coaching gig, right? It took Mike Zimmer like decades to get given that opportunity. He's turned it down twice. I don't know how long you can rely on that door continually knocking for you.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, to your point, Detroit being as alluring of a situation as it is, like I said, I think is a piece of the puzzle, but I don't think that that's the whole thing. I do think that there is something else going on here, and I wonder if it's the fact that maybe not everybody is wired to immediately jump to wanting to be a head coach. Maybe he does not want to. I think that people often lose sight of what it is to be a head coach. You know, when you're a coordinator, you are in charge of your side of the ball and how the plays are called and what personnel to use and things like that. When you're the head coach, I mean, you're way more than that. Not only do you have your hands on both sides of the ball, but you're a CEO, you're a people manager, you're a coach manager, a player manager. You also have to work very, very closely with the general manager. You're the person who is doing every single post-practice interview, post-game interview, post-anything interview. And so being a head coach is so much more than just being a good play caller or being successful on that side of the ball. You really have to want this. You have to want that kind of responsibility. And I don't know for sure that Ben Johnson doesn't. But when you talk about like, this is kind of strange, when maybe we should have looked at it a little bit more closely last year, because he is from the Carolinas. Like, he played at North Carolina. Him going back to be the Panthers head coach last offseason was like this homecoming thing, you know, up and coming, hotshot offensive coordinator, number 1 overall pick. You're going to be picking a quarterback. Like, you mentioned that, but all of those things stacked on each other. That Carolina job should have been the one that he took a jump for if he wanted to be a head coach right now. And we can sit here, you know, hindsight and say, oh, he must have known that the Panther stuff was going to be terribly bad. I don't know if anybody knew that it was going to be that bad that we saw. Certainly Frank Reich didn't, and the staff that he brought in. But yeah, I think that when you start to put together these pieces that we have seen about Ben Johnson and his decisions over the last couple of years, I just wonder if he wants to be a head coach. Because, like you said, you can make the Carolina excuse. You can't really make that excuse with Washington or Seattle. Like even if you talk about geographically, one's on the far East Coast, one's on the far West Coast. Like, you had your pick. You basically
hitting
had your
everything.
Pick here.
We're literally giving you a choice of anywhere in the country, and you're still turning it down.
And I think, you know, he's 37. He's going to turn 38 in a couple of months. That's still young. Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, that it's like, hey, just because you have this opportunity now does not mean you're always going to have this opportunity. But if he doesn't want it right now, then he doesn't want it. And at this point, you have to wonder, like, does he really want to be a head coach? Because even getting more into you saying, oh, maybe these opportunities won't always exist for you. Okay, now if he becomes a head coach candidate next offseason, this is now the first question that all of them will ask. Not, hey, what are you going to do with our quarterback? What are you going to do with our offense? The first question that every team will ask would be, you've interviewed now 2 years in a row.
Right.
Do
What the
you
hell's going on?
actually want to be a head coach, or are you just taking this interview because you want a pay raise? Like, which one is it? So that now also, I think, will go into how this is handled in the future with Ben Johnson.
And that is the interesting thing, because you've got some reports saying, look, the man, he's just loyal. He thinks he's got unfinished business. He wants to win a ring in Detroit. And then you have other reports coming out saying Ben Johnson wanted a ton of money. I think it was Adam Schefter that posted shortly after, presumably fighting fire from the team side of things, saying, yeah, he wasn't necessarily the guy anyway. And there were teams that were shocked by his demands, quote unquote. Josina Anderson had posted something from like way before this cycle, from like December or something, saying that Ben Johnson was apparently looking for $15+ million a year as a head coach, which is like 2 to 3 times what the average NFL head coach is earning, and would put him up with like Jim Harbaugh money, you know, one of the best paid head coaches in the NFL. So it is this fascinating world now where there's reports of all kinds of stuff. And you know, and even if those are true, right? Let's say Ben Johnson's out here saying, I'm not taking a job for less than $15 million a year. That could be just because Ben Johnson wants an absolute ton of money. It could also be because he doesn't want the job, and that's his way of doing that, right? Rather than just telling teams, I'm sorry, I'm not interested in your job. He's out here saying, I'm just going to price myself out of the marketplace and they'll make the decision for me. Like, that might be his way of staying in situ, you know, and also potentially getting a pay bump from the Lions along the way.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe it's a thing where he's setting a wild number now, like, oh, my number's 15 million. And it might be crazy egregious for this cycle, but who knows? Maybe you floated the number out there. And let's face it, if the Lions once again have an incredible offensive season, there might be a team next offseason that goes, I don't care. It's 3 years in a row now that his offenses have dominated the league. Give him $15 million a year. So it might be a crazy, egregious ask right now, but maybe just because he threw that one out there, maybe it's like the long-term plan with him, where it's like, all right, if they're not going to do 15 mil this year, maybe they will next year. Now that they know the price tag, I don't know.
There are also people that just negotiate that way, right? Like, let's say Ben Johnson wants $7 million a year. Well, the way of getting $7 million is to go out here and tell them I want 15, and then when we finally settle on 7, it seems like a bargain. You know what I mean? Like, there are people that think that's the way you negotiate. So maybe that's what he's trying to do, and it just backfired. And in fact, they went 15, get the hell out of here.